Thank you for tuning in. This is Dr. Zanu. Today we're going to be talking about why children struggle with reading. It is important to note that before we attempt to evaluate and label a child with a learning disability, that we consider contributory factors. In this video, we'll discuss contributory factors, factors that may significantly impact a student's reading skills, and those we must rule out before considering a learning disability. Here are some other objectives that we have today. We're going to define reading. We're going to explain the importance of reading. We're going to identify factors outside of a learning disability that may impact a student's reading abilities. And then lastly, we're going to examine how contributory factors impact specific cases. So let's get into it. What is reading? Now, reading is oral language in print form. Reading is a fundamental skill that is needed to improve memory, communication skills, focus, empathy, learning, and overall academic functioning. For a child to have the richest educational experience, we want to find out what are the potential factors that are impacting reading. There are many factors that can impact reading, actually, and so that's why it's important before parents and teachers explore the idea of having the child evaluated for learning disabilities that we look into some of these primary factors. So before we deep dive into the contributory factors that impact reading, let us talk a bit about how reading skills are developed. And we're going to look at this through the language continuum. On the language continuum, we see that language starts with oral language. And this is critical for reading, very important. So this is pretty much the first sign that shows that a child is going to become proficient readers. So this is where children repeat or imitate what they hear. So they're singing, they're labeling objects, they're reciting, or doing simple nursery rhymes that they are hearing. And that is the oral language component. Oral language is normally developed naturally for children, so that's very good when they have this first skill. After the oral language skill is fully developed, we now move on into the early literacy development. And for early literacy development, this is where the child now starts understanding phonemic awareness skills. So understanding that words are made up of individual sounds called phonemes. So they know that C is K, A is A, and T is T. So they understand individual letters and sounds. They're learning that. And then that moves further into phonics, where they're now understanding that letters have sounds that unlock what the word says. And as they develop these two, or as they're gaining understanding, they're going to need support further through explicit and systematic instruction. And this is where school comes in, where the student, now that they have developed level 1 and level 2, which their parents gave them ably by speaking to them, by having them watching the TV and hearing the nursery rhymes, by talking with them, by when going to the grocery store, pointing at objects and telling them colors, telling them numbers, telling them letters. So the parents did their part at 1 and 2. So now that the child is getting all those letters, understanding those letter sounds, they're now ready for school. And when they come to school, they Sometimes some students already have these skills, and some students even more, to the point where they have some sight words, which is exciting. However, when they come to school, we're now at the stage where they are learning to read. And at this stage, this is where the teacher is now going to use explicit and systematic instructional strategies to help the students to learn. So the I do, we do, you do approach is mainly used at this point. And then this is where the teacher is further going to develop the phonics as well as fluency. So as for fluency, the child is going to be exposed to more sight words. The child is then going to understand now that individual sounds are grouped, and those sounds that are grouped can be put together to make words. And they're exposed to even more advanced word, multisyllabic words, and they continue to be exploring new words and more words, which eventually, as they practice, that's developing their fluency. With fluency being developed, that means then that the child is now at the stage where they are now ready for vocabulary. And vocabulary is where they're understanding the meaning of words that are said. So they're not only now just seeing cat and say cat or bat or boy or toy or, those form of words, but now they can apply some understanding to those words. When they have gone through the learning to read, then they are now at the reading to learn, which is the complex state of reading. And this is where reading comprehension comes in, which is the complex cognitive process involves in intentional interaction between the reader and the text and extracting some form of meaning. So those are the main steps in how reading works. So the oral language to the early literacy that they gain at home, coming to school, gaining that sight words, improving and understanding semantics and phonics, and then being able to apply meaning to words and meaning to passages, and improving that form of inferential reasoning skill. So that's how reading works. Throughout this process from 1 to 4, some students develop it quite smoothly. They move through the process. However, there are some students who may have some struggles throughout this process. And it is very important that as teachers, we know where these students are. And so we can meet them there to then get them further. And as I said, this video, I'll talk about this more in another video, how to improve reading by first identifying where a child is. Because if a child comes to us without those foundational skills and we start teaching them comprehension, it means then that there's a gap. And it means then that the child will not show growth in how they're learning. So we first have to go back to where we left them off or where they stopped learning the skills, and then meet them there and then take them to where we want them to be. So now that we have some understanding or more understanding of how reading works, and I'm going to go through that in another video, but we just wanted to get an understanding so far of what it is. We're now going to look at factors that may impact a student's reading. Now, here is one that's very important. Vision and hearing. Vision and hearing definitely can impact a child's ability to read or how they have access to instruction. Not being able to see print material is going to affect how they're reading, their fluency, their comprehension, their vocabulary, all of it. And then not being able to hear is going to affect oral language. It's going to affect all parts of reading, pretty much, as we have just gone through. So it's important that teachers and parents look out for this. And some of the things that are common for students who are having challenges with either vision and hearing are things like they are squinting their eyes, or they're tilting their head or covering one eye to see the board clearer or to see visual aids better. Or they have to sit very close to the television or whatever instruction, however instruction is being provided at that moment, they have to sit very close to it to see it. Or they're rubbing their eyes excessively or complaining of headache or something of that sort. Then we may see that there is some vision problems which may be impacting their learning experience. And then for hearing, we might see that their processing is a little bit off. So while other students' response time, is quite fast, you realize that there's some delay in how they respond. Not only that, but you may realize that there is some delay in their language or speech. Or you may also see that there is some reduced hearing in that maybe when the bell rings, they are not immediately responding, or they just fail to respond to sound generally. So those are some of the things to look out for. And this is very important to rule out before we can even consider that a child would potentially have a learning disability. Now, it's important that a child's vision and hearing is tested at least once annually. Some places they do it twice, that's good, but at least once annually a child needs to have hearing and vision checked out. Another factor that may impact a student's reading ability is their English language proficiency. As we know, our classroom is diverse and there are students from different countries with different languages. And so we need to cater to those students, as well as understanding that those students will not be performing at the same rate and pace as monolingual students in terms of their reading and reading skills. So it's important to identify and to measure their reading skills to see where they are on the access scores, the WIDA language levels, to see where they are. Are they at a level 1 or closer to a level 6? And based on this information, it will give us some understanding as to how they will be performing in reading comprehension or even on the basic reading scale. According to state law, every Student Succeed Act of 2015, all students who are English language learners should be assessed annually so that we can know their English language proficiency. Based on how they are progressing with their English skills, that can also give us some data as to what are the factors that are potentially impacting their reading or their literacy skills. And so that information captured yearly will kind of plot a graph to show us what direction the skills are going in. And that information by itself will be helpful to see if the student is just generally struggling with literacy or whether or not the English language proficiency piece is what's impacting the student's learning. Another factor that can impact a student's reading is cultural factors. As we know, our children are from diverse backgrounds, from diverse families with different beliefs and practices. And so culture affects how a child performs in the school setting. And specifically, culture affects how much the child reads or how the child gets meaning or implicit meaning from whatever they are reading, how they interpret a text. So it's important that when considering why a child is struggling with reading, that we look into the home setting, the cultural setting. So for this part, we want to have conversation with home. We want to connect with families to hear about, their thoughts, their values, to hear their practices, their rituals, and to learn more about the roles, their gender roles in the family, to learn more about customs, communication. And so, learning more about these, working with family in a collaborative way, will then help to improve how that child is performing in reading. So, cultural factor is important. Definitely, this part we want to always be in touch with the family. This one also goes in well with English language proficiency. So, cultural and English language proficiency normally are hand in hand. And so, we want to connect with these families on an ongoing basis to hear how we can support them or how we can best improve students' outcome when we work collaboratively. So, cultural factors may cause some form of conflicting educational and behavioral expectations for the student between the home and the family. And so that's why that collaborative piece is important. Something also based on culture is to note how long ago these families have been in the United States. Are there some form of communication barriers? Are there some relationship barriers between home and school? And kind of working around to see how that can be addressed. Another factor to look out for that is impacting reading is attendance. Now, attendance takes many forms. First, there is the mobility piece with attendance that captures how often the student moves between one school to another, or state to state, or country to country. That piece, that change in setting, change in instruction, definitely will impact the student's performance in reading. Coupled with that, the student's attendance pattern is a student often coming to school late. Because if they're coming to school late, it means then that they probably will miss the core reading instruction time that's allotted in the morning hour. And so continuous absence or lateness will then see them not getting the instruction that they need for reading. And so they are struggling, or they will have some struggles when that attendance piece is not ruled out. So we always want to look at the student's attendance when we are considering what are factors that may be impacting the student's reading. Go back and look, if is the student skipping class? Is the student coming to school late? Did the student move a lot over the few years? Those are factors that also will impact the reading ability. And then another important one that we want to look at as well is family factors and medical history. Family factors may include traumatic events that take place in the family, or if the family is experiencing poverty, or if there is a lack of emotional support in the family. Is the family going through stress? The length of residency of the family in the United States. Those are some family factors that may be impacting a student's learning and reading in school. And so we want to always look into some of those things. As it relates to medical history, that can be because the child has some form of illness. The child's nutrition might be impacted, as well as the injury has caused some form of severe, blow to the child's cognition, or there is some form of TBI. So it's important to always consider the medical history, as well as to have ongoing conversations with families to hear how they can be supported so the child can have, the richest experience at school. And this one is very important. Well, they're all important that we look into, but this one is extremely important. Is there a lack of appropriate instruction? So what happened is many times the children are coming to school. However, the instruction that they're being provided is not matching the area of need. So, for instance, we're looking at reading. And remember, we talk about reading having 5 stages mainly, or 5 levels. So, phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary fluency, and then comprehension. Say, for instance, the child is struggling maybe in the first stage, which is phonemic awareness. And in the classroom, the teacher is giving the child maybe third grade reading materials to do vocabulary work. That is probably not matching the instruction to the child's needs. We need to first assess what the child's needs are so that we can meet the child where exactly they are. So, something to bear in mind when providing instruction is that we are differentiating the instruction for the child. And I know differentiation can sound a bit overwhelming, but it is very effective. And it's an excellent teaching strategy that will see all students in the classroom showing progress. So we want to have and know individual students' needs, because all students will have different needs in reading or when we're teaching reading. We want to know the background, and we covered some of this earlier, of the child. We want to know the child's interest and attention span. We also want to know the child's language abilities as well as cultural background. And so differentiating instruction, when we know these things, will help the child excel in reading. So it's important that we look into those matters. All right, so now that we've gone through some factors that may impact a student's reading, now let us look at some of these factors in a case. So this case is about John. John is a student that is experiencing economic barriers and lack of stability, including homelessness. His family has moved frequently, resulting in John changing schools 18 times since kindergarten between 8 school districts. Significant attendance issues have also been referenced in his file, with exact numbers unknown due to an incomplete cumulative record. The school multidisciplinary team carefully examined many factors, including, but not limited to, such things as John's school's attendance, lack of regular school experience, lack of curricular consistency, and environment economical disadvantage, and determined that John's suspected learning difficulties are likely primarily as attributed to a combination of those external factors. The team determines that attendance pattern shows that John has changed schools so often or has attended school so sporadically that normal achievement gains were not possible because essential intervention components could not be delivered in a comprehensive and consistent manner. Moreover, since enrollment in this school, John has been the recipient of intensive Tier 2 interventions. Current progress monitoring data indicates that while John continues to perform at a level well below that of age and grade level peers, he has made extensive progress with consistent school attendance and provision of interventions. Though this data is for a relatively brief 6 weeks, it does suggest that John is capable of making appropriate academic progress when he attends school regularly and experiences consistent instruction. So this case, we see that John is a student and where attendance is the contributory factor here in question. So for this case, we see that John has changed school a lot. We see that in changing the schools, that, it raised some questions. Is attendance the thing that is impacting his reading? Or is it that he is just having reading challenges for whatever other reason? And so the school was able to collect some consistent tiered intervention. And tiered intervention meaning that he's benefited from a small group, or he's benefited from one-on-one experience using some form of evidence-based intervention. And the school collected some data consistently for 6 weeks. And when they collected that data for 6 weeks using that evidence-based intervention, it shows that John is not making adequate progress. So then, this information will suggest that attendance is not really the factor or the significant factor that is affecting John's reading. And so in this case, at this time, with the type of data that we have, then that now would suggest that further questioning or further, assessments be done to kind of look into what are the possible causes or cause of John struggling with reading. So this case highlights the importance of intervention, and that is how it should be in a school system when we want to refer a child for an evaluation. We have to have some evidence, we have to have some data that indicates that the child is having some form of skill deficit. And then that's when we will look further to potentially identify what may cause, these form of deficits. So that was the case with John. Excellent that the school looked into that. They collected some data for 6 weeks so they could rule out attendance. And attendance then was ruled out, even though he's not been coming, which is getting him farther and farther behind. That's not one of the main factors. It's a significant factor, but in this situation, the main factor is that he is just not making sufficient progress when he's even coming for instruction. So that's the first piece, kind of identifying how to get him to benefit from instruction and then work on the consistency, so both can be worked on hand in hand to improve John's performance in the school setting. Let's look at another case. So for this case, we're going to look on how exclusionary factors, in this case it's a vision, did not or wasn't the concern or wasn't a factor that's impacting the student progress in school or in reading. So this one is about Mary. Now, in kindergarten, Mary failed multiple vision screening at school and was subsequently evaluated by a pediatric ophthalmologist. She was found to have 2200 and 2250 vision in her right and left eye, respectively, and was prescribed glasses 2 years ago. Mary has been very consistent in wearing her glasses throughout the day, not just for academic work. Her parents have ensured she is evaluated annually and her prescription is up to date. Her vision is corrected to 20/20 with her corrective lenses, and she has been provided preferential seating to ensure she has good access to both close work and board work. Mary has received Tier 2 intervention since kindergarten. Her lack of progress in reading cannot be primarily attributed to vision difficulties. Her vision issue is not deemed to be a contributing factor in Mary's reading deficit. So yes, for this case, I agree. I agree because Mary, yes, while she had vision concerns, and that was a question maybe by the multidisciplinary team, they did see how vision has been corrected. They looked on her consistency in wearing her glasses. Not only she wearing her glasses in academic work setting, but she wears it throughout the school day, at recess, at lunch. She wears corrective lenses. And she has been provided with tier 2 instruction consistently with that corrected vision. And so we can see here then that vision isn't the contributing factors to her reading deficit. And so for Mary, that she's now receiving tier 2, I would suggest that she now moves up to tier 3 supports, or depending on other factors in the case, may be referred for an evaluation to look into, what's going on, or what are some factors that may be impacting her reading. So we've looked into 2 cases in which we applied, contributory factors, and we've seen when contributory factors are, the cause of maybe reading difficulties. And then there are cases where there are some factors, but it's not really the primary factor affecting a student's reading. So now that we've gone through all of that, I just want to reiterate some of what we've gone through. The factors that may impact reading: vision and hearing, English language proficiency, language dominance, cultural factors, attendance, family factors, medical history, appropriate instruction or lack of appropriate instruction, and lack of evidence-based intervention. Now, that's a lot. I've said a lot. Now, always let us look into these matters first before we want to refer a child for testing for disabilities. When we look into these matters and we have enough data gathered that these matters are not the cause of reading difficulties, then that is when an evaluation is warranted. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, any concerns about this presentation, please feel free to leave a comment below or to share the video or reach out through other mediums that I have shared in the link below. Thank you. Have yourselves a wonderful rest of your day.